little bit confused. But so I just a quick outline and a question. We're actually going to go because right, Sifim, Zayin, and Chet are really about Beit Sim and Kechal, which have interesting things, but are not our main topic and are really covered in other Simanim. We're going to spend most of our time in Tet, so I'm going to start with Tet tonight, actually. But I wanted to ask a question first, because I was thinking about this of, so Tzadi Chet, in either in the Torah or the Shulchan Aruch, Zayin, Chet, Tet, can we put like a label on the three of these that like links them together based on versus what we've seen up until now? So I'll open that up.
They all seem to be focused on like shirim and specifically around shishim and like things that are close to shishim, whether it's like Hamishim V'Tesha, shishim v'echad, like they all seem to sort of center around that.
Perfect. And that's what I thought. I actually wrote for myself in my notes, I wrote Devarim shebavatlim karov l'shishim, right? Things that are batel, near 60, not quite 60. It could be 61, it could be 59, right? These are things that are, which in a couple of weeks, we're actually like, Sadi Tet doesn't cover this, but when we get to, I believe it's when you get to Kuf, we actually start getting into categories of things that are not mevatel at all. And here are things that are just kind of breaking the 60 paradigm a little bit. Right, that 60 has been really the standard, and we'll see that we even had the Gemara, right? You know, that everything is mevatel but shishim, and here's where we start to get into categories of, well, maybe not, and we'll see actually in the Ramah it gets kind of interesting as to what he thinks breaks that, and the arguments around it. So, any other thoughts? Maybe I'm not holding by my title as necessarily the best title for these three.
I called it exceptional ratios.
I think that wins just for creativity. That's great. But all right.
I also call 98.8 utterly exceptional ratios.
I think you're just winning today. That's amazing. So,
I would even offer immeasurable ratios.
Ooh, okay.
There is I cannot imagine any way I could tell if something is 59 to 1 or 60 to 1 or 63 to 1 or 48 to 1. I don't know if there's any way really to actually mamash measure that. So we're really talking more of a general principle and a general idea, and not like the measurements themselves are almost irrelevant.
Great, and maybe we can bring up a case, right? Which case that we have here just really plays out the idea that we actually don't know the size of the objects.
And if it's lach belach, then even more. And then when you start taking, are we also including the seer? Are we counting the walls of the seer? We're not going to. Mathematicians will kill themselves over this.
Yeah, no, which we saw in the Gemara. But someone said, which is the one topic in particular where we see we're not willing to like measure the ratios, the actual volumes. Hey, yeah, exactly. Thanks, Noam. Right, which by the way is a little crazy, right? I guess if you have the time, you could do a displacement on each egg, right? And you could tell like how much volume does each egg actually have.
So you don't need time. You put all the eggs in one.
You're right. You don't need time. You put them all in a big pot. Yeah. So, and you just displace it, and that's all you need. I remember seeing that somewhere. I didn't see it this time, but I remember seeing that at some point, somebody arguing about that. Maybe it could be in Pei Vav, but I saw that. But if I can find their source, unless someone knows it, I'll bring it up. I'll send it out to everybody. But
can I ask a question about industrial kashrut and how this plays out?
You can ask. We'll see if I have an answer. So,
well, because Asher has a good point that this is like, it's ridiculous, 59 versus 60. I mean, who's going to measure this when you have just a pot of soup on your stove? But if you're dealing with, tons and tons of gallons of this, that, or the other thing, that's actually all measured by weight. And you can then convert that to volume, since this is by volume, not by weight.
Yeah.
And you could theoretically do it,
It's true.
Does that ever happen? I mean, do people actually do that? I don't know what happens if you have a, gargantuan batch of cookie dough or soup that's going to go in Campbell soup cans.
So I know it does, right? That's right. Rav Lanis's story that he told us last time, I believe, but I've heard it from before about, the camp, where you have, 200 starving campers, and lunch needs to be played out, right? That's when, the idea of using a non-Jew actually becomes really important, because a lot of times we don't know the ratios, and they're not, especially like Asher, I think you brought up lach belach, good luck. But you're right. I don't have a good answer for the eggs. I will say, just from like a practical point for eggs, that I know there's a big debate. I didn't look back at the Tshuvot between Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Ovadia Yosef about like whether or not, because, and this is, by the way, it may not even so much apply today, because now there's a lot more free range eggs, but in free range chickens. But in the days when, chickens were like, there were no males in the chicken coops, essentially, right? You knew these were not fertilized eggs. About like what to do about blood, where Rav Moshe Feinstein said you should throw the egg out. Still, eggs are cheap, if I remember correctly. And Rav Ovadia says, no, you remove the blood and you're fine. But I should find those Tshuvot, so I'll put it, and maybe one of the Rebbeim can actually correct me if I'm wrong on that. I'm just doing this from memory. So
that's correct. That's correct.
So, and I will also say, like, from a practical, I'm not a posek, but from a practical kashrut perspective, it's funny. I was thinking about this morning. I make eggs for my daughter and for my wife every morning, and it takes time. I check all the eggs as I crack them open. But for white shelled eggs, I don't. It's like once in like a year I find a blood spot in one of them. It's pretty rare. And because most of them are candled these days, right? They hold them up to, they check them via light to see, which for white eggs is really easy to see if there's anything in there.
I used to work in a restaurant where I would crack dozens upon dozens of eggs a day, and I never saw a single blood spot.
Yeah. So
I have seen in Israel, but not in the past 6-7 years. Although nothing's really changed in the past 6-7 years.
I actually get them on a semi-regular basis, even with white eggs.
Oh, really?
Once a month, yeah.
So there could be different experiences, depending on where you get your eggs from, and But
I want to address something that Asher said about who can really measure this. I agree with you. It's like because even if you would try to measure it mathematically, there's a margin of error. You might be off by a slight amount. So you're right, you probably can't. But I want to point out another facet of this, which we didn't maybe think of, which is that ultimately the din is tam. So if we measure it by 60 and we think we have 60, and then we allow to eat it, so we eat it. Now, if we don't taste anything, it's kosher, even if we were wrong about our measurements. And if we do taste something, we can't eat it anyway, even if we were accurate in our measurements and there really is 60. So in a sense, if you think about the 60 rule, really all it is permission to start eating. It's not really permission to eat it. It's permission to start eating. And once you start eating it, you'll have to decide if you can continue. So that kind of, I think, alleviates a little pressure. Right? Comments?
But it also sort of makes the 60 versus 59 versus 61 distinction even more ridiculous, potentially.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I'm just saying, yeah, it is a strange.
Either ridiculous or really it's trying to get at something else. It's really not about the measurements. It's about something else that we haven't necessarily, or at least I haven't touched on exactly what it is.
The interesting thing about the egg one is that's something that you really can measure exactly if you don't do displacement.
Yeah.
It's almost like a Kabbalist, it's not really Kabbalistic, but it's almost like a Kabbalistic notion that we have to have 60. And either we'll have it by volume or we'll have it by count. But if we have 60, then we all of a sudden are in that world of permission.
Can I try and frame it a little bit differently, potentially? And let's see, I think there's something about telling yourself a story that I did as much as I can to make sure there's nothing bad in my food, right? It's, I've always, maybe I'm a paranoid person. I always think about what if the apples in the supermarket, someone sprinkled bacon on them, right? I actually think about these things. For Pesach, Pesach is when we really actually do think about this in some ways, right? Where it's we really are allowed to, for a week, go nuts. And be I want to make sure everything was so checked. It was nothing touched it. But the rest of the year, it's we do as best we can. And best we can isn't I tried it, but come on, I didn't try very hard. It's we try really hard. But, at some point you have to say to yourself, Like I can't sit there with everything I do with a microscope and a magnifying glass and a spectrometer and see if there's no non-kosher substances. But also I have some like reality of like, yeah, like 60 to 1 is a pretty great ratio. Also, if I bite into it and it still tastes like treif, I shouldn't be eating it, like that happens. Maybe not very commonly, but it can happen. And, so it's like, it's a frame to tell us like, I did what was, the best I could. And still, sometimes that's not good enough, but sometimes it is. Like maybe that's the frame I've been thinking about it, but with, I don't know if that works for people, but.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I just think it also makes a lot of sense within the same framework that like Rav Nachman presented of like, I need this basic thing that makes me feel like I've done what I could reasonably be expected to do in order to begin eating this food. And then when I begin eating, like again, you taste it or you don't. And then like if you don't taste it and there's like something that approximates 60, you're like, this numerically feels insignificant. I don't taste it. This is probably fine. Or you taste it and you're like, I can't eat this anymore. Right? It's like, it's this threshold of like, to begin eating this, I need something that makes me feel like I'm taking enough precautions that I reasonably don't think I'm eating a sir.
Yeah, that's why I think for like everything here is b'diavad too. You have to remember it's not like you can go and say like, I really just wanted to put a little bacon in my food and I won't be able to taste it, so I'm just going to drop it in there. And we haven't. I don't think we've actually done this, but it's not batel, right? If I did that, at least for me. So it's if I do it b'mezid. Yeah, go for it.
One more thing, just back to that 60 idea. It's almost like there's a gezerah de Rabbanan that you have to have 60. As long as you fulfill that gezerah in some way, and therefore it can be by counting or by volume. I'm still thinking about the eggs.
Oh, interesting.
In other words, as long as you fulfill that gezerah.
But the eggs were 61 because they wanted to be by mass or volume, not by counting, right? Or at least that's what the tool thinks.
You're right. But that, I don't think that makes much sense, because who says that who says that one extra one is enough? Maybe it's one, large egg and a medium egg. They're very different in size.
Well, if you're thinking ostrich eggs in there, you should.
It's an assumption that all the eggs are about the same.
No, one extra egg means that the ratio, the difference between an egg and another egg is a 60th.
Exactly.
In volume, and it's not. Some eggs are much more than a 60th larger than the other egg. So I should have 2 or 3.
Yeah.
So why one more?
Because having this number is supposed to counterbalance and give us a chazaka that 60 is taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, we're not supposed to go in that direction of I got 10 real small eggs here or whatever. You're not supposed to go in that direction. The rule of thumb is if there's enough eggs, then we have it. I think that's how it is.
So I like that. It's with that. Maybe we'll do we'll look inside, but not with eggs yet. We're going to start out of order with Seif Tet. I don't remember if I told people I was going to do this yet or not, but I figure since we're going out of order, we're starting with Tarovot before Basar B'chalav, we can also go out of the Torah's order on this piece too. So I want to start in the Torah. Tzadi Chet Seif Tet for those who have the Seifim. If not, it starts Kol Sheyesh Shishim Keneged Yisur. And it's the very end of the Torah on Tzadi Chet. So I'll give people, and maybe someone wants to volunteer to read just the Torah to begin with, and then we'll dive into the other commentaries. Did I see someone raise their hand?
I can read.
Go for it, please, Lexi.
כל שיש 60 כנגד האיסור, מבטלים אותו אפילו אין ה-60 כולן התר. כגון גדרה שיש בה 59 זיתים של התר, נפלו בה 2 זיתים, אחד של דם ואחד של חלב, כל אחד מצטרף עם ה-59 של התר לבטל חברו. So, like, time there is like 60 times the amount of the isur somewhere, it's like batal, even if not the entirety of those shishim are like heter. So, for example, we have 59 parts of heter in something, and I'm adding simultaneously from commentaries, and two, and a bit of dam and chilef fall in. Like the dam can combine with the 59 to make the 60 that battles the chilef, and vice versa. וכן 30 זיתים של התר שנפל בהן כזית דם, ו30 זיתים אחרים של התר שנפל בהן כזית חלב, ונתערבו אלו התערובות בשוגג מותרים. And well, this is one where basically everybody agrees that the Torah's girsa is wrong, and it should be Esther Matasha for the first part, but 29 or 30 bits of heter and like one bit of isser in one pot, 30 and one bit of isser in another pot, and these get like mixed together. Again, they can, if these get mixed together b'shogeg dafka, then it's mutar because like the same mechanics happened in the first thing that we mentioned.
Good. Before you go on, I just want to ask, what's the difference between those two cases, and like what principle are we not seeing play out here to allow this to happen potentially?
I mean, it's dafka saying we're not doing chanan.
Yeah.
Which the shach and the taz get into, mostly the shach.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to just spell that out, if that's okay, Lexi, for everybody. I'm sure everyone got this, but just right. If we say chanan, right? If we say that chatichatz manaseh nevilah, when I drop the one piece of the one, let's say beitza worth of dam, one kazait of dam rather. Sorry, I'm back in beitzim. Right, kazait of dam in 30 others, a team of I don't know whatever it may be, like meat, or let's say soup. Let's make it easy, lach balach. Then that whole soup, if I say chanan, becomes right nevilah, and so we have nevilah, and then the other one, the same thing with the one I dropped the chaylev in, and they're both nevilah. They're both asur, so combining them shouldn't help me necessarily. So, but if we say that there are ways around this, but if the easiest way is just to say we don't hold chanan for sha'ar isurim, for other things outside of basar v'chalav, then right, which is Rabbeinu Ephraim, if I remember correctly, then we're okay here. So. And the other point I just want to, and we'll look at the Prisha in a minute too, but the other point I want to push on is the word b'shogeg, which Lexi, you very nicely pointed out, right? This isn't like, oh no, I accidentally dropped, 1/30 of Isser in this soup, and I dropped 1/3 of Isser in this soup. Not a problem. I'll just go combine them, and it will, that we're not allowed to do, right? That's, this is a b'shogeg. I don't exactly know what this kitchen scenario looks like, but we'll just assume for the moment. So, okay, keep going. Please.
You've made 3 mistakes and only noticed it after the 3rd mistake.
Yeah, that's great. And knowing in between is going to be a whole big question. But yeah. So anyway, yeah. Sorry, go for it.
Joel. So what does the shogeg do? Since you're emphasizing, you might as well explain it. What does the shogeg do that can't be done with intent?
It's not mivatel, lechatchila, essentially. You're not like intentionally pouring two things.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. Why is it different?
It essentially makes it a real b'diavad situation, I think, right?
Okay.
I mean, we're going to get, this is, I think, maybe I'll say just my own perspective. Like what b'diavad means in Isser v'heter is like an interesting question in and of itself, right? B'diavad, like after the fact, or, because everything's after the fact. You've made it, and now it's made, and now you're going to eat it, right? In some ways, like even if I did it b'mezid, I now still have soup that's been combined, and so it's still in some ways a b'diavad. But this is
not. But there's a distinction between b'diavad and b'shogeg.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also like Stafka seems important. Like we have that like principle that they articulate about like. I mean, interestingly, here that's not relevant if you don't say chanan, but there's also the thing where they talk about like things that like my bimalava heter bishogeg, like kind of like uses that sort of language, like dafka, with this like principle of when. So it feels like it's kind of playing off of that as well.
Great. Yeah.
What I would add, I think it's adding now, is that if there's any form of intent, that should trigger a very serious measuring.
Yeah.
A really serious. Well, if you say b'diavad, accident, shogeg, then we can take the gross measuring that we're doing. Anyway, that's been my thoughts about it.
Yeah, this kind of plays out what I don't know if my frame works, but still a frame of like, I actually am trying to do my due diligence to not eat Isser versus like I'm trying intentionally to do something that allows me to do it. But Rav Nachum, you had something you were saying too. I'm sorry. It's
Well, I was just saying that shogeg is different from b'diavad for sure.
yeah.
You're right. Everything when it comes to us is b'diavad, but the shogeg means, he didn't know what was going on. It could be if he did it b'mezid, you might call it b'diavad, but it's still usher and it's still b'mezid. He still did that thing. That b'diavad thing came to us through a mezid action.
Yeah.
I want to say one other thing also. We may distinct. There are cases when you can marbe alav. There are cases we'll learn later where you are allowed to add to mevatel. So he's kind of coming here to say this is not such. You might say, well, it's already mixed. It actually is a bit of a chiddush. You could say it's already mixed in one and it's mixed in the other, and I'm just putting them together. I'm just marbe on them because it's already in a mixed state. In other words, I'm putting two issers together. If you think about it, actually, I'm not mevatling a heter in an isser. I'm mixing two issers and creating a heter. There's no isser. I'm not mevatling asur levatel isser vatchila, but I'm putting actually two issers into each other.
You're not adding a heter to an isser. You're putting an isser in isser. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not putting an isser into a heter either.
Yeah.
I'm putting an isser into an isser. and lo and behold, it becomes mutter.
But here it doesn't.
There's a good halamina to say, like, go ahead and do it.
Yeah. So that's what we're pushing back on here. It's interesting. So, Lexi, go for it. Finish up the tour here.
וכן שלושה מיני איסורים של יבש נתערבו זה בזה כזית מכל אחד, כל שני מינים רבים על השלישי, מבטלים אותו, פטורים על שלושתן. We have like three, like a mixture of three yavesh b'yavesh kind of things, and they're all different types of isurim. And like, yeah, when they're mixed together, you're patur on each individual one because the other two will like always be the majority against the third thing, and so, yeah.
Of course, you can't eat it.
Well, right? Don't give it away yet.
Well, it says patur. It just says patur. I'm just patur.
So
I mean, that gets into our whole thing with like the bit in, I think it's vachim or whatever, and like, what patur, patur from malkot or whatever. But
good, we're gonna read that in a minute. I do, but yeah, you can imagine this, right? You have three isurim that potentially you couldn't I don't know. You couldn't just take three isurim of yavesh that are together. You could just eat them, and you could say, "Oh, mutar," but it doesn't say that. It says patur. So actually, let's look at the Beit Yosef there, because I think that's the first place. It's the first place I want to go. It starts umashe katav v'chen shlosha mine isurim shel yavesh nit'arvu ze bazeh. It's the second. For me, it's the second Beit Yosef, the second one that's bolded. On tet. People, just give me a thumbs up if you have it. Great. Someone want to read? No, go for it. I'm volunteering you.
Yeah, you notice I didn't raise my thumb yet, so I just have to.
Oh, I didn't. Yavni, go for it. It's yeah.
Wait, I actually
just give me the.
It's where the yud is. If you're looking for it, there's a little yud in parentheses, maybe.
Yeah.
At the end of the previous section.
I have it.
Shlosha minei isurim yeveshin.
Yeah, go for it, Noam. Well, Yavni, we're passing it to Noam.
Okay, מה שכתוב, וכן שלושה מיני איסורים של יבש שנתערבו זה בזה וכולי. היינו, ההוא הפיגול והנותר והטמא, שבלן זה בזה, ואכלן פטור. So this is talking about Sugi in the Gemara, in which pigul and notar and tameh get all mixed up together, and one who eats all of them, even though independently you would be chayav for them, but the fact that they get all mixed up together, it means you're patur.
Great.
Vaha vadai pshita dasurim bachilahem velo ba Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish ela lefatran mimalkot. So it's certainly obvious that from a eating perspective, there isn't one. And when Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish comes to tell us about this, he's only informing us to say, not only is it not prohibited, you also don't have to get.
Other way, it is prohibited to eat, but not prohibited.
Yeah, it's certainly prohibited, but you don't get lashes from it, right? V'im ken lo hayat tarich rabbeinu lichtov din zeh deha lo nafgalan mine mideh. So from this perspective, there's really no reason for the Torah to have told us this, because there's no practical implication for us, because we don't have Malkut today. Ve'lo katvu ela mishum demine yalfinan shnei dinim harishonim denafgalan minahu tuva uvahachi nicha she'afal pi shehu din yavesh b'yavesh katvu kan velo katvu b'siman kuftet shehu makom dine yavesh b'yavesh. And the only reason that he informed us of this is my understanding is this is sort of comes out as like a national derivation from the first two laws.
I think it's the other. I think this, right, which really comes from the Mishnah and Orla, teaches, right, the idea of it teaches us the first two laws that we learned, right? We derive those from here.
This step to get to the first parts of the Torah. So even though he really should have taught this in a different place where we're actually dealing with Yavesh B'Yavesh, you sort of need this step to get to the other ones.
Great. In other words, the Torah, why is he write this is like an irrelevant law to us. You can't eat this, right? It's because it helps us get to the idea of the first two principles. And the proof I have for that, the Beit Joseph, I think, is saying, right, is if this was just to tell us the Din Halacha, he would have written it over what Siman is Yavesh B'Yavesh. I can't remember right now. Just Kuftet, right? He would have written it in Kuftet. In fact, he wrote it here in Sarichet is proof that this isn't about the Din of that you can eat these. You can't do that. This is about the previous parts that we just read about what happens if that an Isur can be Mevatel another Isur. So does that make sense? Is that I have some wild looks at me right now. So yeah, great. Okay. So with that, any questions about that you can't eat it, but you just wouldn't get Malkut, assuming that we still had a system where we were lashing people for eating Isur?
Is that a Deoraita Derabanan distinction?
You think that it's only Asur Derabanan? I don't think so. I think because Malkut usually, with the exception of like Malkut Mardut, right, which is when you're violating it, Malkut usually means it would be like Isur Deoraita. So that's my guess. So I didn't look into it. The Rambam often makes that distinction. I didn't look here to see if he says anything. So. Anybody else know? I'm open to hearing somebody else who looked into it.
I don't know. I did not check, but I would guess the opposite. I would guess that it's a siddur but not. But maybe you're right.
Oh, interesting. So, okay. And we did see, right? We saw a case earlier of something where it is asur deoraita, but according to at least some opinions, but not.
Chetzi shir is asur deoraita in certain right, but I don't think this case is. But maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't check.
But good. I didn't ask you to prepare the Prisha here on, and this is going to start out with what Lexi brought up, and then really kind of, but does anyone want to read the Prisha on Lamed Aleph? Maybe you looked at it already. Maybe it's, you like reading things cold. The Dibur Machil here, by the way, is V'chein shloshim zeitim shel hater shenafal behen kezayit dam. I should probably check. Does everyone have a page that has the Prisha on it? Okay, that's good. Yavni, are you saying?
I can try. I haven't read it, but if you...
Great. Let's go for it. So just to remind us, right, this is the piece in the Torah, which he says, if you have 30 zaytim of one heter and 30 zaytim of another heter, and each one has a zayit of Isser that falls in each of them, and then they somehow b'shogeg get combined, that you can, and he says 30, which is important here, that you can then, it's all mutar because the two Isurim cancel each other, which that ratio should already sound a little weird to you. So, but Lexi pointed that out to us already. But go for it.
וכן 30 זיתים של התר שנפל בהן כזית דם וכולי, לאו דווקא בכל אחד 30 זיתים, אלא אפילו
Echad is what I have there.
באחד 29 זיתים, why echad? Anyway.
But be'echad, one of the pots. Let's echad.
Oh, one of the pots out here.
Yeah.
באחד, 29 זיתים, סגי, וכן להדה בתשובת הראש, כלל ב' סימן ב', עיין שם.
Yeah, good. I have called kaf, but right. So this is not only right. It could be one of them can only have 29, right? Because then you have 59 plus one zayit of Isser plus another zayit of Isser, right? And that would be batel. And he says, and that is lehedja. That's explicit in the Rosh's tshuva on this, right? So the Beit Yosef says the same thing. But the reason the Prisha does, I thought, a nicer summary of the issues here. So I thought we'd go for him. So okay, keep going.
Okay. ואין להקשות, המי מותרים אלו תערובת בשוגג, נמה קודם שנתערבו נעשה כל אחד מהן נבלה, דרבנו לטעמי דלא...
So actually, just stop there first. Because Vein Lakshot, what's this problem that he said whenever someone says
don't bring the problem that like, oh, but isn't it naset nevela? Isn't each one of them naset nevela before you combine them? Because the tool by the tool there's no chaticha naset nevela.
Keep going. We'll keep reading there.
Ken im gabe basar b'chalav, except for basar b'chalav.
Great.
Yeah.
So he solve problem one, right? Problem one is, well, why aren't they become nevela? The Torah doesn't hold that for Shar Yisurim. Okay, keep going.
Right. Gam ein lakshot ketanu rabanan
I have Ketav Rabbeinu.
Ketav Rabbeinu. Sorry, maybe I shouldn't have volunteered. The print is a little small. בסוף סימן נ"ט איסור שנתבטל ונתווסף בו אחר כך מן האיסור דחוזר ונאסר. So another thing that we might want to challenge it with is that the tool said elsewhere that if something gets nullified in something and then we add, if we mevatel a little bit within a big pot and then we add more isu, that the stuff that was mevatel can get didn't actually disappear, but it can get recombined with the new stuff, which doesn't seem relevant to this case.
It may or may not. Right? That's an interesting principle, right? That's important that we'll see later, right? Choser v'neor, right? It's like you reawaken the isur that's in it, essentially. Right. So keep going. So why don't we challenge that?
כן, החינמי נצטרף שתי זיתים, האיסור לאסור, והתמיירי שנתווסף ממין איסור הראשון, על כן נצטרף לאיסור. So in that case, where it gets reawakened, it's two of the same types of isur, and that's why they join up and combine flavors. מה שאין כן כאן, כמו שכתוב בסמוך, which is exactly the case where exactly the point of this whole discussion here is that we're talking about two different types of isurim that therefore cancel each other out rather than combining.
Good. I think there's like a nervousness here that he's pushing aside, though, that I had when I read this, so maybe other people had it as well. How can one Isser cancel the other out? It's like Isser is Isser, like, which if it's about Tom, it makes sense, but if it's about how much Isser is in the thing.
That applies to the first case, too. You don't have to get into the complication of the two pots for...
Yeah, exactly. It also applies to if you have a pot of 59 and plus 2 Isurim, 2 Zaytim.
Yeah. Exactly. Actually, you said if it's about Tom, it makes sense. Tom doesn't solve the problem. Lexi, go ahead.
What do you mean Tom doesn't solve the problem?
I mean, the case that we learned this from with Reish Lakish is Pigel, Notar, Tame. They're all the same animal, perhaps, and we're talking about different Isurim. And we get into an extremely complicated question, which I don't know, maybe it's not extremely, but a complicated question, which is, are we talking about different kinds of Isser, Mavatli Issers that you can't be over on the Isser of Pigel or the others? Whereas here we're talking about the Isser of Treif and different Tamim. It's really not comparable. You see what I'm saying?
I do. I just like think, yeah, as in like you could say it's a problem if we like are particularly reliant on this dafka following the paradigm of like the pigul, notar, and like tame thing. But like I think like the Rosh's explanation that he gives feels like extremely intuitive, that like when you're trying to but you're trying to make sure that its taste is no longer relevant, and like it makes sense on the one hand that when you have like only the isurim altogether, obviously like even if you're patur from one of them, that doesn't mean you can eat just like something that is ultimately exclusively isur. But like when you have something that is like mostly heter and there's like a part of another isur, if that isur tastes different, like I feel like it makes a lot of sense if we say we don't want any of these individual isurim to be detectable, to say that like the other ones that don't taste the same could like work to cancel it out.
Yeah. What if you had like 50? What if you had 51% Isser and 49%
Then
heter?
presumably,
But yet they were all
then
different things. That
presumably you would taste that.
Well, no,
well,
maybe
no,
not.
you don't, because each
Just
one
such
of
a
them has
messy taste. You don't taste any one of them.
I
You don't
mean,
taste-
my guess
I have
guess is that if you have 51% like isser of different types of isser, that it would be the same deen ultimately. I mean, you could talk about Durban versus Doraita, but that would ultimately be the same deen as like the Pigul, Notar, and Tame one, of like it would be usser to eat, but like you would be like pator if any of these were like an isser Doraita from Malkot.
Right, I think exactly. That's what you said. That very good analysis. I think what you're saying. In other words, you'd be putter, but why would you'd be putter? Because you didn't do any one of the Isuri, because each one. But you would be. Why would it be also to eat?
Because it's majority isser.
Because what? Majority is right.
Isser.
In other words, we have these two concepts: kol chinachar tam and kol chinachar rov. Tam is irrelevant, but rov will come into play at a certain point. Once it becomes rov, the assumption of this siman, of this halacha, I assume, is that there's at least a majority heter.
Well, so I'll even go back. It couldn't even be. It doesn't have to be rov. It could be if you eat kazayit isur, right, within a certain amount. That in itself might be still a problem, even if the tam is batel.
Then what did the Gemara mean? What did Reish Lakish mean?
Okay, yeah, that's fair. It's,
I mean, I don't know.
yeah, I don't have an answer to that, at least at the moment. But yeah.
I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about what if you ate it in a toch kadei achilat pras,
yeah,
and you ate all three of them.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you get three isuri? What does Reish Lakish mean?
But it could also be, I don't know. I have to look. Like the whole idea of if I have let's say I have 60 zaytim of soup that's completely fine, and I drop in a little bit of dam, like a less than a kazayit of dam, or up to kazayit of dam, and it's batel. And you could say, oh, okay, well, it's batel, and then I drop in another kazayit of dam, and it's batel, right? Let's pretend choser v'neir doesn't exist, right? You can imagine you just keep doing that, right? And you could essentially end up with mainly dam, even if you didn't get the rov, and that prevents you from playing that that game.
That's a different case though. That's doing dam and dam. It's not doing two separate isurim.
Really good. That's why I think this might be a different case, right? The separate isurim. So, right, it may not be a Tom question there anymore. It may just be to prevent the absurd case in some ways. But I'm just throwing that out. I don't have an answer if that's actually true or not. But
Bring us back, Phil.
Good. Okay. Yeah, I got too far. Sorry. But good. So I know so that's right. The Prisha had two. I just want to summarize. He had 2 points that he wanted to make. One is you might have said, oh, well, this is a Hanan problem. He says, well, that's easily solved. The Torah doesn't hold Hanan in Shar Yisurim. And then the other thing you may have said is, why is this comparable to the case of Choser V'Neor? And that's only the case where the mean is the same, right? Just from a straight Dean perspective, this is a different rule. And Lexi nicely brought up, though, that there is probably a point where even though the Tom is batel, it still becomes asur if you just add enough, right? If it's majority isur, it might still be a problem, which nobody said in particular. I want to add, if there's no questions, I want to do one more Beit Yosef on this. This is the last Beit Yosef on Siman Tzadichet, Katav Haran, Beperek Yiran Asher. At least the way my thing separates the Beit Yosef. So when people have it, just give me a thumbs up and we'll find a reader. Yavni, all right, great. Rav, but let's see. Tikva, do you have it?
So which one is it again?
It's
I'm
Katav
not
Hara,
sure.
the Perakida Nasheh, Bisham Hara'a. It's the last Beit
Don't
Yosef
have it.
on the daf. On the daf,
Mhm.
on the Siman. And when you have it, do you want to read?
What,
think-
did you say Katav Aram or Katav
I'm not
Arambam?
sure.
It's like the
Katav
last two
Haran.
lines of the. It's like the last 2.5 lines.
I think I have a different edition.
Mhm.
Did you say Katav Shadat Haravid?
Haran.
Haran. Huh. I know I don't have it. I have to find it. I think I have a different edition than you.
So, okay. Somebody else want to? Maybe I'll actually, we can. Let's see if I can send a picture quickly. But maybe I'll read. I'll read this one, and then we'll come back. Let's. All right. Katav Haran bePerek Yira Nasheh b'Shem Hara'ah dekemesha'arin berotev mesharim lechazait beitzah umechze shel rotev shekin shiro she'im mikrosh yamod al kazait. Right. So he says when you are measuring, this is in the Ran is quoting the Ra'ah. He says when you are measuring with the sas or the whatever we want to call it, so you actually should measure 1.5 times, right, to get to a beitzah, right? Because it will eventually, if you congealed it, right, then it would come down to a kazait. Right? He's talking about like a volume expansion kind of thing here. So, okay. Vehuzal katav, but the Ran wrote she'im devarav nirin. But he says I don't agree with that. Nirin lo tekevan she'amru b'gemara mesharim berotev stama. Right, that when the Gemara says that we measure the sauce, the liquid around, that it just says stam. It doesn't add anything. You know that we should measure 1.5. So mashma de kamochu mesharinoto ukdivrei haram katav harashba zal b'shem balitur. Right. So I just wanted to throw this in. Right, this whole idea of like, well, maybe you might think that we measure based on what eventually the volume will be, not what the volume is sitting in front of us. Right, the Ra'ah brings that idea up, and the Ran says, no, I disagree, and he's got other sources to rely on, that we measure what is, the liquid as it is in front of us at the moment, not what it will be when it recongeals. So. Right, this could actually be lakula and lachumra potentially, depending on what if the liquid rotev is mutar or asur.
This supports what we were saying earlier that we're just interested in 60 in some way.
Exactly, yeah, that's my assumption for why the Beit Yosef brings it here. But I'm making a guess on his organizational scheme, but I think that's why. So, good. So with that, unless there are any other questions, I want to move to the Shulchan Aruch on this seif, if that's okay. So Tzarichet, this is Seif Tet, and in the Shulchan Aruch, and we'll do him, and then we'll do some at least some Shach and maybe some Taz. All right. Any readers? Let's see, who hasn't read yet? Who wants to read? Andres, you want to read?
I'm looking for it. Give me just a second, please.
No problem. I'll give people, give me a thumbs up when you have it. Just great. You ready?
Yes.
Great. Go for
it. Zain, oder?
I know Tet. Go. Tzarichet Seif Tet in the Shulchan Aruch.
Okay, perfect. כדרה שיש בה נון 9 זיתים מיצר, ונפלו בה 2 זיתים, אחד של דם ואחד של חלב, כל אחד מצטרף עם הנותר טעם של היתר. Sorry, של נון 9,
yeah.
לבטל חברו. So it's the same what we just said before.
Great. He does correct. You'll notice he corrects the tour here to follow the Rosh. As we know, he's not there yet. Sorry, ignore what I just said. You're right. Exact same thing.
Okay.
So keep going.
וכן 29 זיתים של היתר שנפל בהם כזית חלב, ובקדרה אחרת היו 30 של היתר ונפל לתוכו כזית של דם. ונתערבו בשוגג מותר. וכן שכן בשתי זיתים.
בכל שכן, I think, but I think is...
אוקיי, וכל שכן בשתי זיתים, אחד של גבינה ואחד של בשר, וכל אחד מבטל חברו.
Great. That's the piece in the Ramah there. Good.
This is already different, no? He changed from patur to mutar.
No, I think it was mutar in the Torah too. The patur was about the three, the pigul, the notar, and the pigul, notar, and tameh, right? Am I mistaken there?
No, you're right.
I am right. Okay, good. So, yeah. So this is if it's this is we're talking about a lach balach mixture here, not a yavesh biyavesh mixture of three things. So, but he does correct the Torah to get him to fit with the to get the Rosh's numbers right, which makes more sense. But I don't think we'll get to the Ramah in a minute. But the Shulchan Aruch himself, the Mechaber himself, I don't think there's anything surprising there. I just wanted to see it so we could use it for the Shach. So,
how do you know it's lach balach? Did we say that explicitly?
Say again?
How do you know it's lach balach? Was that explicit?
No.
Okay.
That's something we get in the shach that we're gonna.
Yeah, that's where I get it from. So, but I mean,
but only for the Ramah. He doesn't assume that the.
I'll say this: I think this entire Siman generally deals with lach balach issues, or it could be yavesh belach, but the yavesh you eventually have to remove it, right? We have a whole thing of like if you can see the isser, if it's ba'ayin, you have to take it out. You can't just like drop your piece of treif meat accidentally into your soup and say, oh, well, it's but the flavor is batel, but I still have to remove the meat itself. So that's why I'm thinking it's lach balach. So, but
can I ask a clarifying question on the Ramah?
On the Ramah, yes.
Yeah. So he says you have a kazayit of cheese and a kazayit of meat, and they batel each other. Is that where it's yavesh b'yavesh, or is that where you have one falling into each pot in the second scenario that the Mechaber is giving?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You'll see if the Taz, right, thinks this is a case of falling into like you're cooking a bunch of vegetables or something like that, some neutral items. But it could be at the same time, potentially.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't. I have to think about
it would work with either because I think like the.
So go ahead, Lexi. Sorry.
As in, I think it would definitely. I mean, it's a kol shekain here, right? Because then they're both like individually things of heter, and we don't see them as like meaningfully combining to become the isser they are when they're mixed with all these other things right now. And so it would seem to me that like they would be permitted with either of the cases.
Yeah, no, I think it's like a case of it's right. If it were gvina and basar that were mixed together first and then dropped in, that'd be one thing, right? That's
right, then that's the isser, like right.
Yeah.
Then that's like basar b'chalav is like not even batel. But when they're not actually mixed together meaningfully first, then presumably either of these would be mutar.
Yeah, I want to emphasize what you said. I'm just repeating it, and I apologize for this, but like the kol sheken, right? That's the whole point, right? You're actually dropping heter and you're dropping heter into. That's why the Taz says yirakot, right? We'll look at it very quickly. It's very short. Tet vav in the Taz, sorry, right? He says shel gvina chule dechol echad pirush shenaflu liyarakot b'kdera demahani kol echad l'shir shishim. Right? He says, we're talking about you have a neutral substance, like you have a bunch of vegetables you're cooking, you have a vegetable soup, let's say, right? If I drop basar into my vegetable soup, it's mutar soup. If I drop gavina into my vegetable soup, it's mutar soup, right? When I drop, if I drop each of them in, each of them is a heter on its own, right? It's all the more so, kol sheken, right? I've got heter, that's mevatel, essentially heter, right? It's only when they combine it becomes isur. So
I think that the relevant question would not be that, like you dropped gvina into your vegetable soup, it's heter. That's not even a question. The question is like, like the question that someone raised is, did that become chalavi?
Good.
Is it nasit chalavi, right?
Yeah. So that's why it would have to be at the same time, right? Or in separate. In other words, if it's less than if you have 59 pieces of no, maybe not.
Are we talking about the 30 pieces case?
It could be either, right? It could be a case where there's two soups or there's one soup, right? I think that if there's one soup, right, you can drop. You have 59 zaitim, you drop a zait of gvina. We wouldn't say the whole soup becomes,
right. I feel like we don't have a concept of like, I mean, I feel like we talk about things nowadays like something is like become like chalav or like chalavi basari, but like I feel like there's the way we talk about it now is if those were like hanan, which like isn't actually a thing that exists, so like, it wouldn't become as if the entire soup wouldn't be considered as if there were one big chunk of like 30 zaitim of gvina. There would still only be one thing of gvina there.
Well, so I actually think I'm going to push back a little bit. I think if you dropped a zait of gvina first, right, then it's a milchik soup potentially at that point. But now you have 60 zaitim of milchik soup against one zait of basar.
I just don't think the concept of milchik soup matters here. I just don't think that we have this like when we talk about that. I think the way that we generally use that term is we're using it the way they generally use chanan. I just don't think that that's a concept that we like see the like rabbis actually using, and that I think like we say there's like this amount of like gvina or like chalav or whatever that's in here, like whether they're following in simultaneously, whether we have these two separate ones that then get mixed together. Like I wouldn't say that like one zait of chalav fell into like 29 zaitim of like yirakot, and now the entirety of that is being considered like it's chalav. It's like, no, I have one part of chalav with 29 parts of yirakot. Like, I think that's how it would still be considered when we then mix them together. I don't think we would be like, I don't think we see this idea of like infecting it so that now shiurim wise it's all considered dairy.
I don't know. I don't have proof right now to push against that. I'd have to look to see if anyone says anything about, the two questions. If you drop another piece of meat in there, well, I guess that would be choser b'neira potentially.
What does the word hanan mean?
It means that the whole thing becomes something. It takes that identity on it, right?
Well, literally, haticha naseh nevela.
Yes.
So Lexi has a good point. We say hanan where nothing happened as far as isser v'heter. The soup was kosher before, and it's kosher after. Do we say hanan by heter? If a little bit of milk falls into your soup, sure, you're going to consider it milchik, but it doesn't mean that the din of hanan applies.
Yeah, but in other words, you're saying
I would call it a milchik soup in that, like, I'm aware of the fact that there's chalav in here, so like I would not be allowed to like lichatchila
put meat
in there now.
Yeah,
so like it's chalavi to that extent.
Exactly.
It's not chalavi to the extent that the soup is like measured as if it were chalavi.
Right. No, I'm agreeing with you, Lexi. I'm saying that actually hanan doesn't apply because hanan is a concept where we take something that was heter and make it asur.
Asur, yeah.
And here we didn't do that.
So, I mean, I guess
but then you would need 60 of the actual, like in a case where you do have a soup, you have a milchik soup, right? And you drop a piece of meat and we want to say this is going to be the case where it is isser. You would have to have a quantity of 60 of the actual cheese against the meat. Wouldn't you would just say it has to be at least 2 kazait of cheese, right? Because this is obviously this case. Like we need more than 1 kazait of cheese, but then it's 60 against the entire pot of soup. So then the whole soup does have a status.
I don't think you need a certain quantity of cheese, do you? Right? You just need to have more total stuff in there than there is basar. So or vice versa.
Right. What we're saying is that you would have, if 1 kazait of meat fell in afterwards, so you have 30 zaitim parv and 1 zait of milk and 1 zait of meat, so the whole thing is asur. But if the meat soup had a lot of vegetables in it, and it was actually another 30 zaitim of parv in the meat soup, and only 1 zayat of meat. In Sachakol, you have 1 zayat of meat and 1 zayat of milk in 62 or whatever, in at least 60 zaitim of parv.
Yeah, I think it's
And it would,
it's
and
that
it would not, and it would be mutter.
total, including the milk and the meat. That's the argument they're making here.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
mean, even I can ignore the milk and the meat, but I'm looking at the parv of each pot. And the fact that I get a zayat of milk and a zayat of meat, you're right, even if it would be 29 and 30, it would
Right.
still be kosher.
I guess what's behind this is that there's the opposite case is if there's like 40 zaitim total, 1 zayit of milk and 1 zayit of meat, then that's
Then it would be also, right? If I had 20, if I had 2 pots of 20 zaitim each with a zayit of milk and a zayit of meat,
That's asur.
then it would be asur. But only because, but not because the whole milk became milk. Not because the milk pot became entirely milk.
Well, so that's the interesting. If I have a pot of 59 zaitim of yirakot, and I drop in a zayit of milk, so it's 59 to 1. So assuming there's no bitul tam at that point, right? Or at least we say there's no bitul tam. Could I then eat? Well, other way. Let's just say I drop a zayit of basar in. Can I then eat?
What's the case? Tell me the case again. I lost.
You have 59 zaitim of. Let's say make it easier. So you have 30 zaitim of yirakot, and I have a vegetable soup. I drop in a little piece of kazait piece of basar into my soup, right? And I mix it in, all that, and I eat it. Can I then eat milchiks afterwards? Can I go drink a glass of milk afterwards?
I mean, that's not perhaps no, you can't. But
yeah,
that's not relevant. That doesn't mean that all the soup is chanan. That doesn't mean there's chanan going on. It just means that that's the law of waiting.
Yeah. Okay.
You ate some soup. It was meaty soup, but it was not all meat.
Like the whether I can go drink milk is a lechatchila language, which is different than bitul language.
Say it again.
Okay.
What?
I'm saying like whether I can go drink milk is lechatchila language, whether which is different than bitul language, which is inherently b'diavad.
I mean, the whole laws of waiting, what you wait for and what you don't wait for, is not our topic. Is a different world.
Yeah, true.
I guess the other funny thing about this language, taking the language from the Isur V'Heter, is that like one of them, either the milk or the meat, doesn't have to be only a kazait worth. It can be as much as you want. You only need one of them that's the small amount, right?
You could add a ton of milk to this and then eat,
right.
Drop 1 zayit of basar and it would be fine. So.
But the meat, right? But that one piece you'd have to take out. It would be us.
Mm-hmm. So yes, but. Okay, so with that, I know it's an interesting. I hadn't thought that through, so I appreciate that. But I want to see. It's 4:00. The shach is long. How about this? Let's take a 5-minute break. Only 5 minutes. We'll look at the shach when we come back, and then we're going to go back to the adach in Lamed Daled. We're going to skip the beginning of it, the very beginning, like the first line.
Before we start, is the recording still paused, or have we?
No, I remembered. But thank you for reminding me and always reminding me.
I have suffered a couple of times on that, so I'm covering my own interests.
Yes, remind me every time.
Okay, be careful.
So we're going to start in the shach. So he starts out with the whole question of shloshim versus 29, 30 versus 29, which is like the first line for me, and then he says umikol makom tzarich iyun, which is in Rashi Tevot in my version. I was hoping someone would read for us. So someone who feels really up to a long shach. See, Lex, you read? Oh, Yavni, are you volunteering? Was that a hand?
I can, but I've read a bunch of times.
Yeah, I've read a bunch. Somebody who hasn't. Noam, did you read already?
I did, but if you want me to read it again, I'm happy to.
We'll have you. Let's have Noam do it. Okay. I'll remind us, right? This is the rule of you have one pot that has 29 zaitim of heter, and you get a zayit of isser that falls in it. Another one that has 30, and zait of Isser, and you combine the two b'shogeg, and it's still. But the Isurim they join forces with the heter to be mevatel the other Isser. So, okay, go for it.
ומכל מקום צריך עיון, דהי דינה לא שייך לפי מאי דקיימלן חתיכה נעשה נבלה בכל האיסורים, דכיוון דנפל כזית דם בקדרה אחת, ולא היה בו שישים נעשה נבלה, וכן כהקדרה השני. So, nevertheless, we need to look into this because this law doesn't seem to accord with that which we learned elsewhere about Chanan with regard to all Isurim, that once a zayit of blood falls into one pot and there's no shishim in it, it becomes a nevela, becomes like a nevela, and so too with the second pot.
Great.
Right. So we've already articulated this question earlier, but like once it's Chanan, like it doesn't matter how much mixing you're going to be doing, it should still stay prohibited. Mihu reisha ika lifarushe binaflu ashtei seitim bevat achat. However, in the first deen, we're able to explain a case in which the two zaytim fell at the same exact moment. The kol echad mevatel tam chavero, and each one nullified its fellow.
Great. What was just remind us the first theme that we're talking about here?
That it's talking about where you're talking about the 59 zaytim, and then you have the two different Isurim falling at the same time, and then they knock each other out.
Great. Right. So this is the first pot that has 59. You add two, and he's articulating. If I have two Isurim, if I have a pot of 59 zaytim, I drop a zayit of Isur one and then another afterwards. That's a problem because the pot itself becomes a nevela, right, on its own for the first dropping. But if they happen at bevat echad at the same time, then they kind of marshal forces to cancel each other out. So, but because there's no time for nasa and nevela, essentially, I guess we would call it, or something like that. So, but okay, keep going.
But here we're talking about two pots, so it's difficult. The lo havale le harav lesatum hadivarim, and it wasn't proper for the Shulchan Aruch to be closed in this matter, to not explain.
Yeah.
Ve'od shekatav
Stop. Wait a second. Can't let you go. Improve your reading of that line. V'kashet. This is the key point here. The lo havele le harav. You said the Shulchan Aruch, and you hedged your.
Sorry. Yeah, this is the Ramah. This is the Ramah at this point.
You have I was asking Noam.
Oh, sorry.
Specifically, it's you have to say who, not the Rav, the Shulchan Aruch. Who? Which Rav of the Shulchan Aruch?
The Ramah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Because he adds on to this thing, but doesn't. Well, because he should be arguing, right?
He should be arguing. Lo haya lo listom dvarav. He shouldn't have kept quiet. He should have jumped up and objected to this din and said, "We do not agree with this because we hold Chanan." You, Mr. Shulchan Aruch, you, Mr. Mechaber, very nice. You can say your halacha, but on the second part, I have to object. And how come? So his whole kasha is, how come the Ramah didn't object? Was he asleep?
Right. Because the Shulchan Aruch doesn't hold Chanan.
Right. Yeah, the Shulchan Aruch
does not hold Chanan except by milk and meat.
Bishar Yisurim, and the Ramah does. Right, that's which I don't know if we've actually seen that yet or not, but
we have not seen it. We have not seen it, but
the whole objection of the Shach here is going to be based on that fact.
Yes.
So, sorry about that. No,
No. Thank you.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. Ve'od shekatav v'kol sheken b'shnei zeitim echad shel gvina chulei mashma debreisha modeh lehamechaber. Furthermore, we have another issue because he says v'chen, which implies that you're adding on to what became before and you're agreeing, which we know he doesn't. Veha leita lemai dekaimelan chanan b'chol ha'isurim. And it's because it's not that which we established Chanan with all the other Isurim.
Or I would say v'ha leita hadin lamai dekama, right? This can't be the rule, right?
Which can't be the rule.
That what the Mechaber is saying, right? That if you add these two things b'shogeg, that they are mutar, right? That can't be. There's no way the Ramah can agree with that. If you agree that for Shar Yisurim there's Hanan, or for all Yisurim, it's just.
So the Ramah should say, this was a minute. The one Isser falls into a pot of 30. The whole 31 pieces are all Asr, and nothing you do afterwards is going to help. That's what the Ramah should say.
Yeah. If you keep going, it'll be a little bit more explicit. The Pshita.
The Pshita, the Hainu Afilu B'Shogeg, Kidemochach Bekama Duchte, with the Kaman Siman Saritet, Saif Hey Behedja. And this is made explicitly later, or it's obvious for even in a case of Shogeg. Even in a case of Shogeg, it wouldn't be Batel, would be problematic, as we've seen many other places. And particularly the next Siman explicitly. Great.
So the whole setup here, right, is that, so why did the Ramah not object to the Mechaber, right? Say that we don't, in Ashkenaz, we don't follow that. So, okay.
V'yesh lomar desatam hadevarim linyan belach belach delo amrinan chanan behesed meruba k'del b'siman saribet saif daled be'ken katu b'hagah b'siman saif hey. So we can answer that the Ramah didn't argue in a case of lach belach because we don't say chanan lach belach in a case of hesed meruba, in a case of large financial loss or other type of loss. And we see that later on explicitly. The Od Yesh Lomar.
You got to pause there. You got to pause there and talk about that.
All right. So it seems that here the Ramah does not want to make a categorical disagreement with the Shulchan Aruch because you could theoretically find a case of, and it's lach b'lach hefsed meruba, in which he would agree with the Shulchan Aruch.
Well, I think it's more than that, right? I think, right, what he's saying, number one, Ikar Hadin, that the Ramah doesn't hold Hanan in Shar Yisurim, right? He holds it as, like we have a Chumrah in Ashkenaz that we follow Hanan b'Shar Yisurim, but truthfully, the true deen is per the Mechaber, who says it's only Basar b'Chalav that Hanan exists. And therefore, in particular cases, we're going to, wipe away that practice if, like, there's a Hefsed Merubah, for instance, right?
I mean, this is a major point.
Huge. Yes.
Huge point, because we as Ashkenazim, I don't know if everybody who's Ashkenazim, but a person who lives with Ashkenazim thinks of Hanan by everything. Pork falls into your pot, so the whole pot is now Asr. And that whole din is a Chumrah. It's not an Ikar Din, even for the Ramah. It's not Ikar Din. The Ikar Din is like the Mechaber in Hanan b'Shar Yisurim. And he's just saying, l'chumra, when you in general, try to be machmir on this, but it's Hesed Meruba. That's a major fine point, fine tuning to our understanding of Hanan in Basar b'Chalav and in Shar Yisurim.
Yeah.
By Basar b'Chalav, it's even Hefsed Meruba, it's not going to help.
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting point too of what the Ramah is sometimes doing here, right? Where sometimes when he's cholek on the Shulchan Aruch, he's not cholek on the deen, right? He's cholek on the practice, right? Which is very different to say, right? There are places where you can say we don't do this, but we don't think this is really the real, not the real halacha. We don't think when push comes to shove, we don't actually think the rule is like this, and therefore you can follow the Mechaber if you really, really need to. Kind of thing, which is very different of saying I'm cholek on Mechaber. I think he's wrong, right? I think that there is Hanan in Shar Yisurim, right? The Ramah is saying at the end of the day, actually, Rabbeinu Ephraim is right. We just don't always follow him, which is different. So,
but by the way, do you think this is a good teretz for the Ramah, or is this forced?
I think it's forced, but
I agree with you. I think this is forced. So, what's a better explanation?
Well, let's keep going. He's going to keep going. We're not done. We got to finish the shach first before we. I like the question, but it's let's finish so let's keep going now.
עוד יש לומר, דהרב אזיל לטעמי, שפסק בתורה חטאת, הבאותה לכמן סימן צדיתה.
I think it's heavy tiv that I brought it.
Heavy tiv,
Yeah.
where, he brought it late. Okay, fine. Heavy.
I brought it. Like the Shach is going to deal with this later. Yeah. So.
Lekaman siman saditet seif katan tetvav. De'im nit osef al ha'isor b'shogeg kodem shenoda hatarobet lo aminan chanan. That if you inadvertently add onto the isor before you sort of know about the tarobet, you don't say chanan.
Good. This is also, I think, like a major point too here of right.
It's a major limitation.
Exactly. If I can say it out for us, please. Go for it.
Like chanan isn't automatic. It's basically there is some, it's odd, but there is some sort of like mental state that goes into whether it is chanan, meaning the mixture could have happened and you didn't know about it, and then the isur got added to it later, then it's technically not chanan.
In other words, the heter got added to it. In other words, isur falls into your pot.
More heter got added to it, and you didn't.
And then
know.
all of a sudden, now when it finally comes to the rabbi, there is 60. Even though in the intermediate point there may have been not 60 against the isur.
You can imagine like you're cooking soup, right? And you're adding the initial ingredients to it, and you're going to add a bunch of water later. That's just like the order of cooking your soup in this case. And so some isur falls in. And you didn't realize the isur fell in, you add a bunch of water, and then someone says, wait, did you add that thing over there on the counter that, was asur? But we don't say that now there's 60-1, there was never hanan because I didn't know about it. I didn't, at the time I added it, right? It's not and now that I know about it, it's already a 60-1 ratio.
So how does this help? How does this explain the Ramah's silence here?
It's exactly the same thing.
It's the same underlying point. Chanan really isn't a thing for a shar isurim, but so during certain extenuating circumstances, we don't apply it.
So what's this case? Apply this case to this rule.
What you're basing what you have based in front of you, not what is in the entire process.
In other words,
of
the process.
It would have to be that I don't know that there's isur until I've combined both the pots.
Right, exactly.
So it's interesting, like, because I wonder if this is actually not quite the same answer at this point, right? Where
it's not the same answer. No, This is not a forced answer, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, sorry, Joel. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I think the subtlety is really nice here. Is like you can still hold that mikar hadin, right? There is hanan and shar isurim, right? It's actually really the rule, but it's a question of how hanan kicks in is what's now the interesting question of did hanan only happens when you realize the mixture happened, right? There's like a Rav Nachum doesn't like that. I can tell.
I'm thinking about it because I don't. First of all, I don't agree with for sure. The Ramah holds Bikar Adin that behefsid meruba lach balach we don't hold chanan. That's not a question. Now, that's for sure. We're just whether the question is that we're just debating what the reason is for the Ramah to be quiet here. These two dinim are for sure the Ramah's din. And both are reasons not to hold chanan. And both imply, and I think that both imply that mi'ikar adin we go like the mechaber. Because it could be that in Noda Tarovit, by milk and meat, maybe it doesn't matter. In other words, this is a question we're going to discuss later. It's a very big topic. But it might be that this rule is only by Shar Isurim that we say, well, did I know or not know in the middle? I mean, that's a point I'm hesitant about.
Okay.
What?
Yeah, was that a question?
What's the example of where they are cholek, like where Hanan does apply? I feel like if not this one, then where?
Because I think the answer one answer would potentially be that it applies. Pretend there's no hefsed merubah for the moment, right?
Right.
Right. Then if you knew that both pots had Easter mixed into them.
Right, but weren't we already anyway saying that it had to be bishogeg? Like
no, bishogeg could be you combine them bishogeg. It doesn't mean that you didn't know in between.
You cooked
somebody
a
else
piece
came
of
in.
meat. You cooked a piece of meat with chaylev attached to it, and now the meat was kosher, but the chaylev you forgot to remove, and that meat is cooked in your cholent. So there's enough in your cholent against the chaylev, but the whole cholent's going to be usher because there's not in the cholent enough against the meat and the chaylev. Because the meat became chanan because it is called iser davu. It stuck to the chaylev and it became aser first. It was like it became aser and then it asered everything. That would be the case. That's the classic case.
Thank you.
Of course, your children could be hefsed meruba.
Yeah.
Although is that lach balach? I mean, that's an interesting question. It's a complicated issue. What's lach balach? And this is, soup is lach. Is that lach b'yavish? We think about yavish and lach balach. But there is really the whole case that we learned with Rabbi Landis in the Gemara of Tipat Chalav is really lach b'yavish, right? And that, maybe even in Hesed Meruba, we are machmir. Where a drop
but I also
on.
think that it's kind of complicated because we use these terms in kind of somewhat varying ways. Like it feels like when we use yavesh b'yavesh, a lot of times that's code for like dafka, distinct things that have gotten mixed up, and it's not that they're dissolved together, but there's a distinct separate thing that I just can't recognize anymore.
100%.
And
they're distinct, exactly. So yavish. So you could say that lach balach is everything else. Or you could say
that,
no,
I think it would make sense given and I know they get into it in various Rishonim get into this and why that would be the case, that it only applies in certain things. But I think the idea, right, is lach balach, it's all mixing together, right? That they're saying that chanan doesn't make as much sense when it's all literally blending and dissipating, whatever. That chanan makes more sense when things exist as discrete entities than any sense where things are kind of blending and not just existing as discrete entities. If that's the reasoning we're using, which I think is the one the Rashba and I think the Ramban use as well, it would make sense for that to apply to anything in which stuff is being functionally mixed together.
100%, you're right. Lach balach generally means that the toms really mix throughout, and therefore anything cooked you could say is lach balach, even if it's hot, dry pieces. But I still think that there could be a difference between pureed things mixing where everything is evenly mixed and things where they're not evenly mixed, where the fat is more in that piece of meat than it's in the rest of the cholent.
So, that would give us some sort of definition of that it's only really lach balach if it's mefafeh throughout, right, in some ways, right? It's,
right.
Well, I know they also make a distinction at some point. Some of them talk about dafka liquid cases versus then lach balach solid cases, because there's the whole
flour,
wine boar and the water and stuff, which is literally water mixing or all together, which is presumably pretty evenly dispersed.
Or a classic case is flour treif. Now there's tamei flour mixes with kosher flour, and it's all flour. Is that lach balach or yavish b'yavish? It's very, very dry, but it's mixed. So it's really lach balach.
Really. A liquid property, yeah.
Can somebody make the argument for me, please, with the tipat dam in the beitza?
Let's ask the question. I may move on from it because I think it's.
Well, I think it's not clear for me why when we measure 60 in the beitza, why we're measuring it against the whole beitza and not just against the dam ratio to the part that's still kosher.
So the answer, I'll say it very quickly, and then the answer in the Gemara is shara tichla bechula, that the bad stuff, the dam in this case, has exactly what we're talking about, has perpetuated throughout the entire egg. That's the answer about why for an egg with dam in it that you count it against the whole egg and not just essentially the whole egg you're claiming has absorbed the dam at that point.
So that is lach belach. That's the framing of the egg.
I think it's the whole egg becomes a sur. That's kind of, but we're not going to do Siman
okay. I just wanted to hear the reasoning, but it's okay.
Yeah, we'll talk later. I just know that the Gemara says that there. I'm not, but But I want to move on to the shach a little bit because I'm just looking at the time, and I would like to finish up the shach if possible. So we have right that you have to be nodat tarova beforehand, right? All right, so im ken. Maybe we'll have Lexi. You want to pick up from there and read for us?
Sorry, where exactly are you picking up from?
Im ken mari hacha shnitarvu.
In the shach?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Where on the I don't know if we're at the same
It's
time.
Shach Lamed Dalet, about in the middle.
Yeah, it's about, I'd say about halfway through, but it depends what your pagination looks like too. So.
Yes, 1 second. What was the last thing we had before this?
Vein tzarich ela shishim neged ha'isur.
If somebody else has it up right now, they might want to read because I don't have it on my page at the moment.
Anybody else can jump in. If not, we'll go back to Noam. But Noam, I didn't want to burden you with too much reading. So
I still have it. If anyone wants to jump in, you might get it.
Noam, take it for us. Go for it.
Im ken ma'irei hacha shnitarvu shtei kederot yachad kodem shenodat tovaret. So if that's the case, then this din applies in which the two pots got mixed together before you were informed about the forbidden mixture. Aval lemai dehochachti sham dafilu lo noda hatavaret amina chanan. But there, where he was citing himself before, I proved, or I argued that even in a case where we didn't know about the tarovet, we would still say chanan. Im ken lo shayacha dina b'nafal shtei kederot b'fachot mishishim im lo balach b'efsed muraba. So he sort of falls back to his first answer. So he that then this deen of falling into two pots with less than shishim is not applicable unless we're dealing with lach balach and a hefsed muraba.
Great.
So he sort of knows that the second, well, the first answer is weak, he knows, so he has to bring the second answer, but he can't just rely on the second answer because later on he says that the second answer is not right, or the assumption behind the second answer is not correct.
Great.
Keep going?
All right. Yeah, keep going.
Aval mikom makom nafka mina linan dechol echad mevatel ta'am chavero kishenaflu shnehem bevat echad le-chamishim v'tesha.
Great.
Right? So nevertheless, there is a practical application here with regard to where one flavor nullifies the tam of the other one, where they fall at the exact same moment to 59. So that's the first deen of the Saif.
Yeah, which I think would say like that the Ramah is actually making a comment when he says the Kol Sheken, he's talking about the first part, not talking about the second part, right? He's talking about the Resha, not the Seifa.
So you're viewing this as like a third answer that like we're like not even under like.
That's the way I understood him here. Yeah. So I don't think he's comfortable with either of his answers so far, and so he says, oh well, maybe this is really what the Ramah is talking about.
It's not so much a formal answer as you try to work it through, Trying to force it, I think.
But I think that's the way I'm understanding. And someone else, I'm happy to hear another explanation so far. But maybe let's keep going, and then we'll see if we can see where he goes with it. So go for it, Noam. Keep going.
All right. Inami im nafal kazait gvina le-chamishim v'tesha zeitim heter.
I have 29, not chamishim.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry. Esrim v'tesha zeitim heter u'b'ketera acheret nafal kazait basar l'shoshim zeitim sheter v'nitarvu elu shtei hataro v'shogeg v'mutar delo shayach lomar chanan the kevan the dain kulo heter ukede el siman saridal saif va bekama duchte. So alternatively, if one zait of cheese of milk fell into 29 permitted zaitim, which means you get to 30, and then in another pot, a kazait of basar fell into 30 also 30 permitted zaytim, and then the two became mixed together inadvertently, it is permitted because we don't say chanan because they're all mixed up.
Good. This is actually going back to the argument discussion we were having before, right? Which is, I think, a great point of maybe it's not that the Ramah is saying I agree with, like that all the cases you brought here because of Hanan, but, there's no Hanan, right? This is not a case of Basar v'Chalav, right? In each case, we actually, unlike when you drop an each into each pot, you're dropping a heter into pot one, a heter into pot two, and then you're combining the two, so no Hanan ever happened in this case.
Yeah, although unless there's a Girsa without the Kol Shekain, I feel like it's hard to argue the Ramah doesn't agree with what comes before.
I know. Well, he never really answers this question in that sense, right? If up till at this point. If rather, let's put it this way: if you only use this answer, right, which he could have used, he could have just started with this, right? It's heter, but the Kol Shekain doesn't really work with that language-wise. So, which is what Lexi's saying.
Because because what you're saying is when you eventually mix the 30 zaytim of the 30 zaytim with the cheese in it and the 31 zaytim with the basar in it, they get nullified at that moment.
Exactly. So. And you never had a point where there was any nevilah. So.
Right. This is like we were saying before. You only say chanan where you're creating an isser. And since he says kulo heter, he says here. Daim kulo heter. So therefore, you never had chanan. But of course, you guys are correct. That's what he's saying at the end. Kol shekain b'shnei zaytim. In other words, it's hard to force that into the Ramah at this point.
Yeah,
I still like as the best answer lo noda. We don't say chanan, even though the shach himself, maybe disproves it, but maybe the Taz doesn't agree with him. In other words, that answer is a good answer. It's a good answer. I don't know why the shach doesn't fully accept it, but it's a good answer.
Because we'll have to see when we get to Tzadi Tet, right? That we'll have to see why he's so against Noda as a Lo Noda as a principle for Hanan, and we'll see if we could accept half of him and not the other half. Essentially.
Exactly. That's what I'm kind of leaning in that direction.
So, but
we're learning. The shach has a lot of very important concepts that we're learning.
Yeah, this is like an amazing shach to end the kind of.
It's a summary of a lot of things which we haven't yet seen, but which we're going to see.
But which is why so far I don't feel too bad about taking up so much time on it. But it's all right. Should we? So
no, he's got more answers. Inami nafka mina im nafal kezait dam letoch shishim zaytim shel heter ve'achar kach nafal kezait ve'od shel chelev leotan shishim ve'echad zaytim de'ein sarich shishim neged shtei zaytim elu shel isor ela gam hakazait dam shenafal barishona mitaref levatel hakazait ve'od shel chelev. It's a long sentence.
Yeah.
Ilu lo hayinu mitzarfim hakazait shel dam lo haya shishim levatel hakazait ve'od v'hafshta dekol echad mevatel tam chaviro gam hu mitzaref levatel. So there's another practical application where one zait of blood falls into 16 permitted zaytim, and then afterwards another kazait, a little bit more than a kazait of chelev fell into those 61 zaytim, and you don't need the 60 against these two zaytim of isor, because that first zait of blood that fell into that first fell already joins. It already joins with the other. It joins with those 60 to then nullify the zait plus one plus a little bit of chelev. And if they had not joined, if the dam had not joined together, you wouldn't have the 60 to nullify the zait plus. Because now each little bit of Isur is going to nullify the Tom of the other one, and then they'll be nullified, right?
However,
yeah, mihu kol zeh dafka b'shnei minei isurin she'ein tama shaveh. Aval b'min echad leolam chozer b'nior u'kedei alaman siman saritet saivav. However, this only works when you're dealing with two distinct prohibitions. But if you're dealing with two distinct prohibitions with different tastes, where their tastes aren't equal. But if you are dealing with one type of mean, then you're going to have the issue of which they're going to sort of reawaken, and then it's not going to be batel.
Great. So if it were dam and dam, that would be a problem. So,
right.
But I mean, this is, I think, a good summary of all the issues around all of this piece, and also, I don't know. I'll stop there with that piece.
So, Joel, what does this last piece add to his issue with the Ramah?
Great. Here was my guess, and I was hoping to open it to you because I wasn't 100% sure. But I think what he's saying here is the Ramah doesn't agree with the whole thing. Like the Hanan, what he agrees with, what he's saying by Kol again is like, I agree that when there's two different types of things, right, that Choser v'Neor is not applicable. Right. That's what I agree with in this piece. But that's what the Ramah agrees with.
And how does that doesn't that actually fit with the case?
Yeah,
in other words,
so.
In other words, the Mechaber is giving such a weird case. He's clearly coming to teach you a principle and not a din in a particular case. And it's the principle that the Ramah agrees to. They're talking about a principle here.
Yeah. I still struggle with that answer, truthfully, even though this is his last answer of like, why doesn't the Ramah say something like, but we don't, hold that if there's, 1 in 29 and 1 in 30, that's a problem.
We would have been happy. We would have been very happy if you had done that.
Yeah, exactly.
Why not do it?
But we wouldn't have had such a great shach, right? So maybe that's why. He did it to anticipate that in the future some great, somebody would come along and say this.
What I'm saying, I think the last answer is a very good answer, because I think the reason he didn't say anything is because he's caught up in the logic of what's going on here. We're in a logic case. We're not in an actual din case. And he's saying, yeah, all these conclusions make a lot of sense. And yeah, I agree with the basic concepts going on here.
That might be in some ways an organizational answer too, right? That the way that this is organized is right now we're not talking about Hanan, Bishar Yisurim. Right now we're talking about the case of Kintu Yisurim combined to be Bevatel, one and the other, right? And so in that case, I agree. When we get to Hanan, we'll talk about Hanan.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, I'm gonna take a deep breath, and then we're gonna, since we haven't looked at Zayin and Chet yet, I want to look at those in the Mechaber and the Ramah. So we've got 16 minutes. So let's go back, just turn back the page, and I just want to make sure that we actually see these dinim. We won't get to the Pri Megadim and I think the question of Derabanan versus Deraita, but maybe we'll touch on it a little bit, or maybe I'll do another shiur. I don't know.
Or you'll tell us outside.
All right, maybe
you'll summarize.
Yeah. I will. Okay, I'll send an email. I'll tell outside. Okay, that's all right. Who wants to? Maybe I'll read. If that's okay with people. I'll read for a little bit. That was really a good thumbs up there. All right, Zayin. בעצה שיש בה אפרוח או טיפת דם, שנית בשליים אחרות, צריך 61 לבטל פליטתה. All right, so you have an egg, and it has either an efrach in it, or it has even just a drop of blood. And you cook it with other eggs. So you're let's say, it's a whole question about what's with the water. I'm not 100% sure, but let's say you're cooking with a lot of other eggs, and it exudes flavor, right? And I'm going to just put a quick side note on this. We're not going to look at it inside. There's a difference between for a tameh egg. If you look in the Siman on Beitzim, if it's a tameh egg, we actually say that the shell keeps the exusion from happening to be a problem. But for an egg with an efrach or a dam, even if it still has a shell on, it's still a problem. The flavor of it still goes throughout the pot. So it's cooked. You need 61 in order to be to be mevatel what it exudes. The egg itself, you can't eat, right? You can't say, oh, I cooked 61 eggs in there, and I'm now going to eat this this egg itself. But we're talking about its flavor that kind of went throughout the pot, and you need 61. And we talked about at the beginning, the reason for that happens to be that because you needed, we don't know, the eggs are different size, right? And so in order to make sure that we are actually mevatel the volume, we add an extra egg. So, but, all right, that was pretty quick, but any thoughts on that? Okay. So let's go to chet. Kechal mitbatel b'shisha v'chamishim. All right. A kechal, so an udder, all right, it takes, an udder is where we're talking about here, where the udder has the milk of the animal in it. And if you cook that with 59 others, then it is batel. Okay, we'll see this is not a 60-to-1 ratio anymore. This is a 59-to-1 essentially, or the
59, you cook it with what?
With 59 other kechalim, I guess that would be the plural.
Really? Is that the
other
case?
parts of just by mass or something.
I think you cook it with other
other things. Sorry, yeah.
It's cooked with meat. The problem is the udder has milk in it, so it has
with the rest of the meat. Sorry, I'm going to back up. You cook it with the rest of the animal, let's say, or the other animal parts. Let's say a meat soup. That'd be a good. So it needs 59 to it. Yeah. So right, which is, but the Haggah is really what. I don't know, I'm not going to go further on that. I want to do the Haggah, which is really what I'm interested in here. So, kol ha'isurim hanoagim bizman hazeh kulam mevatlim b'shishim milvad chametz b'fesach v'yayin nesech kasher nitbe'er b'hilchotehem. This is all other isurim and that we have today, right? They're all batel b'shishim, except for chametz on Pesach, which we'll I don't know if we'll do in this, but it's b'mashahu, and yayin nesech, right? Also b'mashu. All right, and those are in their own separate. We'll explain those where they are. Right, as long though, and this is the big catch, as long as it doesn't give any flavor to the actual kedera. Aval inoten tam beoto kedera behu asur mitzad atzmo. But two conditions, right? If it gives flavor still, and it itself on its own is asur. Afilu be'elef lo batil, right? Even in 1,000 is not batil. Kozman shemargishim tamo, as long as we can still taste its flavor, we can still tell it's there. All right, and he's going to give the example. V'lachen melach v'tavlim midvarim da'avide elatama, right? So salt and spices that are there to essentially add flavor. Im asurim mechmat atzmam, if they on themselves are asur. So you have salt, not salt that absorbs something asur, but salt that itself is asur. All right. Einan batelim b'shishim. Those things are not batel b'shishim. So, okay. So we'll look. What do I have here for tzadi chet? Here we go. Okay. Not the Beit Yosef, the Shach Kaf Vav. That's what I wanted to look at. But first, any questions on that? Okay. So let's get someone to read Shach Kaf Vav Kol Isurim. Nobody. Yavni, go for it.
כל האיסורים וכולי. פירוש בין של תורה בין של דבריהם, כך כתב הטור והרשב"א. דלא כרמב"ם שסובר איסורים של דבריהם מתבטלים ב-59 כמו כחל. וכתב בבית יושב שנראה דעת כל הפוסקים כהרשב"א וכן פשוט בכמה דוכתי. So, what do we mean by all of these? So we're referring to everything D'Rabbanan and D'Oraita, according to the Torah and the Rashba. The Rambam The Rambam disagrees and thinks that anything that's derabanan is actually, you only need 59, not 60. And the Beit Yosef says that the general opinion is like the Rashba, that you need 60, even for derabanan, and not like the Rambam. And that's apparent in several places.
Great. So I mean, this is, I think, important, right? That we generally have a rule. It doesn't matter if it's D'oraita. It doesn't matter if it's D'Rabbanan. We say it's mevatel b'shishim. But there is the opinion of the Rambam hanging out there that's important, right? That the Rambam says no, for D'Rabbanan we actually say 1 in 59, right, and not 1 in 60.
Well, once
And
again,
that's like makes that as a principle to underlie the Kachal case.
Great. Exactly, which is a D'Rabbanan case, but that's the one exception, and all other D'Rabbanan cases are taken as if they're with the same ratio as the D'Oraita. So,
well, not according to the Rambam, but yeah,
according to everybody but the Rambam.
Everybody else, yeah.
So, but
who's going to be measuring this?
Who's going to be measuring?
Like the difference between 59 and 60 is so slight.
This was Asher.
Even if you were to do the displacement technique, there's a huge room for margin of error.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I think at the basis of it, the ideal seems to be still, although the Rama says we don't do this anymore, seems to be that you have someone taste it who's permitted to eat it. And that we don't.
I mean, this also kind of feels like I forget who was saying earlier, this idea of sort of some like metaphysical significance assigned to like the number 60 and how we like feel around that feels like what's like at play here. Like, given that we have this kind of extra significance we attach to 60 that goes beyond just what we think it relates to Tom, then we have this conceptual divide of like what is allowed to count towards that 60 or not, and like it makes more sense when we're understanding that 60 maybe has the side that is like kind of dissociated from the mitziyut and more about like what's conceptually happening here, that like we don't actually care that much about whether there's one zayit's worth of difference or whatever.
Yeah, except we do, right? The whole piece here is that we do care about 150.
No, but we do. Yeah. What I'm saying is in the mitziyut, that okay. Like the mitziyut, I'm saying we do care about it conceptually. Like in reality, as multiple people have pointed out, like you're not really going to be noticing that in all likelihood. That we care about this when it comes to like drawing certain conceptual boundaries.
Well, this is an interesting question. What would we say about suffix? What if I have a suffix whether I measured it and I have a suffix of whether I have 60 or not? Yeah. So, in other words, I'm sure I have 59, but I don't know if I have 60.
That's Deah.
Right. Well, right. Well, it depends. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, whether if it's nishpach, if I'm while in the process of measuring it, a little bit of water spills on the floor, and I don't know now if I have 59 or 60.
All right. Okay.
So we said that in Isser D'Rabbanan,
we're Mekel.
We're Mekel.
But I do wonder if it's a case where it's like it's impossible to know, right? It's like that's the measurement error essentially of like the best measurement system we have can't tell the difference between 59 or 60. That might be an interesting case, right?
Right. Well, this is this whole huge topic of what's called a suffix. The whole world, and the simple way of saying it is, if nobody on earth could figure it out, then it's called a suffix. I mean, it's a huge topic.
Yeah. Imagine if the most precise measurement ability on the world couldn't tell this,
But there's those that say no, that's not called a suffix because that's just a problem of your kalim. It is knowable. It's lefanenu. It's knowable. Okay. You just don't have the measurements. You see.
I will at least hold in your minds the possibility that when they speak about it, they're not talking about having precise tools. They're speaking about cooks who know when something is 60 or not. They have a idea about that. There's the whole notion of having precise tools sounds to me like, a panel of Orthodox Jewish scientists in the 1950s. I don't know if there's anything before that. I'm serious. So
I think that's, it's, I think there is a sense to this whole piece too of, right, that we saw the Gemara that we shouldn't be mezazel of like Isurei Derabanan, right? That's really what's coming out here in some ways of like, don't think just because it's a Derabanan Isur, like you can be more lenient with it than you are, and we're makil in certain cases, but in general, like treat it as if it's a deraita.
Rav Landis, with that understanding, what do you make of the 59 versus 60 argument?
Yeah, that's the cook will go. It doesn't feel like 60. The cooks are sensitive enough. Not you, but your grandmother or grandfather. I'm serious. I think that's what they mean.
Sensitive enough to tell between 59 and 60?
They generally know the difference between 59 and 60.
Right.
It sounds a little radical right now, but I can't call it. Well, you heard me, right? I have problems with the exact measurement paradigm.
Great. I wanted to see if there was, I have two more shachs that I wanted to definitely do. I have a lot actually, but we have 3 minutes. So maybe, okay. The one other one I want to do is kaftet for sure. That afilu be'elef lo batil. This is the whole question of things that are made for tam, like their tam is felt. Shemargishim tamo. And so, for instance, salt. So, and this is kafteti says afilu be'elef lo batil. Maybe I'll do this and we'll finish it up. Vechatav be'isur beheter klal kafhe dehainu midirabanan. Right? He says that this rule that something is not batel even be'elef if it's there to give tam is actually a derabanan rule, not a dioraita. Vechatav od sham besof haklal de'im enu yadua im margishim tamo or lo matir. So, and he says, therefore, right, if you don't know, right, I've had this, I mean, I don't know, I'm not an expert cook, but sometimes I'm like, did I add this? I can't taste it. I can't tell, right? Did I add the isur salt or not? Then we're makil because it's a derabanan isur that if it's less than 1 in 60, but it's still there. Right? And he says, the Or Zarua says, right, you can also ask a non-Jew to go taste it in this case, if he's Mesiach Lefitumo. So there's a lot more to say about that. Sorry, go for it.
Even an Ashkenazi non-Jew.
Exactly. The Or Zarua is an Ashkenaz posek where we don't do Mesiach Lefitumo. We don't ask a non-Jew. We don't ask a kfela. Even in this case, we can because it's it's dioraita. This would be mutar, and it's just a question about whether or not derabanan, the flavor is still there to make it asur.
Isn't that? I mean, we've gone full circle from saying that tam is the whole concept and 60 is just the derabanan rule, to now saying that 60 is the real rule and tam is irrelevant. It's kind of bizarre to say that.
Yeah. Which I think plays out of this whole thing of places where how strong 60 is, and here 60 comes kind of back with full strength versus in other places around here we've seen that there are places where it's kind of 60. So,
but I think really the nafkamin is only in that case where you're just saying, do I taste it? Do I not taste it? I don't even know anymore. So we're saying, okay, so you just forget about it. In other words, it's only going to be us if you really know you taste it.
Also, how many cases are there where you have tavlin that are, not that they absorbed Isur, but they themselves on their own are asur, right?
But it doesn't have to be a case of tavlin. It could be anything that we taste even when 60 is there.
That's made, well, yeah.
It's the likely cases of tavlin.
Yeah, kolzman shemargishim tamo. That's fair. So, but I can't imagine too many things that would.
Well, this does come up when you have things like concentrated flavors, artificial flavors. You're in a factory that's manufacturing something and puts in, every one of those ingredients that they put in, even if it's less than this. Actually, the OU does not rely on 60 because of this exact rule. If it's put there, even it's 100, it's 1%, 1% butter fat or 1%, trafe. They say, well, it's less than 60, but it was put there to be tasted. It was put there for a reason. So therefore it's not batal.
Yeah. There is the Taz there, by the way. I just want to play off that, and maybe then we'll end. The Taz there, if people can look inside, gets to the whole question about whether or not fat, essentially like butter, things like that, are, right, they are there for tam, right? And whether or not they count, or we're only talking about spices in particular. But he eventually actually he essentially changes the language to say, we're not talking about a thing that is there for tam, we're talking about a thing that is there that is harif. Right, that actually has very strong flavor and not something that is just that you add because of its tam, right? So, but I'm going to end there. So, because I do have another meeting I need to get to. So,
Yeah.
thank you for all your 2 hours is a long
Very
time.
nice.
Wait. So,
Very
thank
good
you
for
very much.
everybody.
Thank you very much, Joel. Excellent share, amazing and very interesting. At least I enjoyed it.
I did too.
Good. As far as next week, we're going to go to the next Siman Tet. I'm going to send out some sources. I wanted to show you quickly. Joel, you can leave if you need to. I just want to show you quickly something I'm going to send out to you. This is just to show you. I made a little Siman 99 sources for just the first 2 sifim. And it looks very long, but really, what I put in blue here, what I did here, this is the Yerushalmi Truma. The blue here is the same as the blue here, is the same as the blue here, is the same as the blue here, and the green is also the same. It's basically all identical texts. I mean, the Talmud Bavli you have to see, but all the Yerushalmis are pretty much all of these, and then they're quoted down here. Sorry, this is the Rosh. He's just quoting those Yerushalmis. So I gave them to you just so that you should have all the sources, so you should see where the Yerushalmis. But really, you don't need to read them 3-4 times. And then I have other sources here. I'll send it out. There's 8 additional sources in addition to the regular Shulchan Aruch tour. Okay. So see you all next week. Laila Tov.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And one more week, I think, when we're off, you guys on time, I think is next week as well. So
I think you go back. No, you go back on this weekend.
We do?
Yeah.
Oh, I should know that.
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure because I know my teaching in the States goes back to my normal hours next week, and this week it kind of screwed me.
I meant everybody change your clocks. That's what I meant. Yes, if you're in the United States. So, all right. Kol tuv.